All right, let's dive into a time in American history when the country felt like it was literally at war with itself. You had two massive opposing forces. On one side, you've got the rigid black and white world of the Cold War, and on the other, the psychedelic, question-everything energy of the counterculture. We're going to look at what happened when these two worlds collided, because that explosion didn't just define a generation, it's still shaping our world right now.
Okay, so to really get this, you have to think of it as a battle between two totally different realities happening at the exact same time. So in one corner, you have what we'll call the official world. This is all about order, conformity, anti-communism, tradition. You get the picture. And in the other corner, the counter-world. This world is all about questioning authority, personal freedom, experimentation, and straight-up rebellion. This clash, this is the heart of the whole story.
All right, let's break this down. To see how this whole thing kicked off, we've got to step inside that official world first. Let's really get into the mindset of the establishment, a world that was pretty much built on the black and white logic of the Cold War.
You know, what's just incredible when you look at this is how fast everything happened. I mean, the world basically split in two in the blink of an eye. Right after World War II, boom, you get the Truman Doctrine to contain communism, then the Marshall Plan, then two rival military teams, NATO and the Warsaw Pact. And when that Berlin Wall went up in '61, well, that was the final concrete proof. For the people in charge, the world was simple, right? There were clear lines, clear enemies, and, the constant threat of nuclear annihilation to keep everybody focused.
And listen to the way leaders talked back then. It was just as absolute. When the Soviet premier Nikita Khrushchev drops this bombshell of a line, he's not just talking politics. He's laying out what both sides saw as this epic, inevitable showdown. It was communism versus capitalism, winner take all. There was absolutely no middle ground in this fight. None. But at the exact same time, something else was bubbling up right under the establishment's nose. While all the leaders were locked in this high-stakes global chess match, a whole new generation was coming of age. And think about it, they were the first to grow up with both suburban comfort and the constant fear of the atomic bomb. So they had all this safety and security, but they started looking around and asking, wait, is this it? Is this rigid 9-to-5 cookie-cutter life really the American dream?
So you've got all this tension just simmering under the surface. It just needed one thing, one spark to make it all explode. And that spark? It came from a war halfway around the world, Vietnam.
I mean, if you want to see how the official world put its beliefs into action, just look at this number. We're talking about going from under 1,000 advisors in Vietnam in 1959 to over 184,000 combat troops by 1964. That's not a gradual change. That is a rocket ship of an escalation. And it was all justified by that same Cold War playbook. You have to contain communism, period, no matter what the cost.
But here's the thing that made this war totally different. Television. For the first time ever, the firefights, the casualties, all the brutal chaos. It was being beamed directly into people's living rooms every single night. That abstract idea of containment suddenly had a bloody, very human face, and you just couldn't ignore it.
And this is so important to get. The pushback wasn't just happening in street protests. It was in the music. It was the soundtrack for an entire generation. I mean, you hear this raw, cynical lyric from Country Joe and the Fish, a song that thousands of people screamed along to at Woodstock. It just perfectly sums up how the counterculture saw it. This wasn't some noble cause. It was just a meaningless, deadly machine.
So all that simmering tension we've been talking about, in 1968, it didn't just simmer, it exploded. That year was one of the most chaotic, world-shaking years of the entire 20th century.
Seriously, it felt like the whole world was just cracking apart. You had the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, which proved the war was far from over. Then, over in Europe, Soviet tanks roll in and crush the Prague Spring democracy movement in Czechoslovakia, and right back here at home, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago just turns into an all-out street battle between police and protesters, all on live TV. It really looked like the establishment was losing its grip everywhere all at once. And out of that chaos in Chicago came this chant. The whole world is watching. The protesters shouted it as they were being beaten by police, and it became the anthem of the era, didn't it? It just perfectly captured that feeling. This wasn't just another protest. This was a public, generational war being fought for the very soul of the country, and maybe for the soul of the world. Okay, but this whole collision, it went way beyond just politics and war. What the counterculture was really aiming for was something much, much deeper. They wanted a complete revolution of the mind,
A total reinvention of how people thought about their own lives, their relationships, everything. And where did that revolution start? Right in the home. It went right after a core pillar of the official world, the idea that a woman's proper place was as a wife and mother in the suburbs. Second-wave feminism gave this a name, the feminine mystique. And the argument was powerful. This wasn't the dream, it was a cage that was holding women back and denying them their full potential.
So once you start questioning those traditional roles, it makes sense that the next thing to go is traditional ideas about sex. And technology played a huge role here. When the pill came along, it reliably separated sex from making babies for the first time in history. I mean, that's not just a medical breakthrough, that's a social earthquake. It kicked off a massive revolution in personal freedom and how people thought about relationships.
And get this, the revolution even pushed into consciousness itself. For a lot of people, psychedelic drugs like LSD weren't just about getting high. They saw them as tools to unlock new ways of seeing the world, to challenge what's real, and to find a deeper, maybe more spiritual meaning that they felt was totally missing from buttoned-down mainstream life.
So, let's recap. You've got feminism, the sexual revolution, and psychedelic drugs all hammering away at the status quo. How do you think the official world reacted to this all-out assault on its core values? Yeah, not well. They pushed back, and they pushed back hard. This quote from the one and only John Wayne, it just perfectly captures how so many older Americans saw all this. For them, this wasn't liberation. They saw spoiled, ungrateful kids who were just tearing down the very values, hard work, patriotism, personal responsibility that had made the country great in the first place. And all that anger and frustration? It didn't just stay on the sidelines. It turned into real political power. This is when figures like Ronald Reagan start to rise. Why? Because he offered a clear antidote to all the gray areas and the question-everything vibe of the counterculture. His message was super simple, super powerful, and completely black and white. We win, they lose. And for millions of Americans who were just sick and tired of the chaos, that kind of certainty was exactly what they were desperate to hear. But this is where it gets really fascinating. Because in the end, neither side really won. The collision was so powerful, it changed both of them forever. The establishment, really scarred by the Vietnam War, had to back off its rigid stance. They started pursuing détente, actually easing tensions with the Soviets. And at the same time, a lot of those supposedly radical ideas from the counterculture, things like feminism, environmentalism, they slowly got absorbed right into the mainstream. They just became part of American life.
So you might be thinking, okay, this all happened over 50 years ago. Why does it still feel so present, so relevant? Well, it's because we're all still living in the aftershock.
I mean, just think about the biggest arguments we have today. The culture wars? That's a direct echo. The deep, deep political polarization between red and blue states? We're fighting on the exact same battle lines that were drawn back then. Every time we debate personal freedom versus national security, or talk about our distrust of big institutions, we are literally speaking the language that was born out of that original collision.
Look, in the end, this wasn't just some moment in history. It was the birth of the central conflict that, in a lot of ways, still defines our world. It started a conversation and a fight that we are absolutely still having every single day. So that leaves us with one last thing to think about. In this endless tug of war between order and freedom, between the group and the individual, which side do you think is winning today?